Are we recording? Are we
We're
on?
live. I don't understand how you
We're
start.
okay. Hi, hello, everyone. Well, my name is Lynn, and I'm kicking it with
Mas, Masuzio, Mwanza, I guess.
Hey Masuzio. Hey Masuzio.
How you doing,
How
Lynn?
you doing?
I'm good. I'm good.
No, I
I'm good.
asked you first.
I'm answering. Chill, woman.
My bad.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm good. I'm just glad to be here today. Here with you doing this podcast. So first of all, as
Yes.
always, so basically we need to explain to the people out there what exactly is this thing and why are we doing this, right? So Lynn, if you may.
Okay. Well, hi guys. Well, wel- welcome to the very first episode of Bantu Born and Western Raised.
Yay.
Um, could you hype me up just a little bit
I
more?
I I
Really?
I didn't want to get involved with the recording. Chill. I was just like, okay, yay, because I couldn't be like super thing. So yes, Lynn, let's talk about it. Bantu born and Western raised.
Okay.
So like basically, what this whole podcast is about is that me and my crazy friend over here um decided to have a podcast that's mostly about our experiences as children of the Bantu and from Southern Africa. It's basically an encapsulation of our experiences and our learnings. And we decided to read this podcast to like bring light on some of the things that we experience and have a place to share our experiences and share our knowledge on all these different aspects of Bantu culture and and what it means in a modern day society and how we reflect upon our culture versus how we reflect on the way we act in this modern society. And it's the basic idea of the podcast is to give people a light and a space in order to like reflect on look at all these different ideas and have an understanding of what's going on in the society. So I mean that's my version of what I believe Bantu Born is. I'm pretty sure Lynn has a very different version of it. If she wants to share.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Masuzio has all the knowledge. I'm just here to be the hype queen, you know. Basically, for me, basically it's a situation of I found myself in a situation where I'd moved away from home and I was finding it more and more difficult to kind of hold on to my culture and kind of stay in tune with it, and it's really hard in a word that's progressing, and progression is this whole concept of being westernized. So it's getting like harder and harder, and it feels like my traditions and my cultures are kind of getting watered down. So
Mm,
we talked about it at length, and one day I'm trying to have kids and trying to pass on these things, but also there isn't content. People don't have access to the knowledge, they don't have access to the stories, people don't have a platform to express themselves.
yeah.
So basically, we're just kind of lending like a bit of a voice to Southern Africa, because basically not much is known about Southern Africa, let's be honest. But yeah, so Bantu born is Western raised is basically us addressing um that in betweener space, where um, Southern Africans are kind of caught between holding on to their cultures and giving a nod to where they're from, but kind of still moving on with the times. So that's what this podcast is for me personally. So Masuzio, just for a little minute, like vibe your tribe. Like, what's your connection with Southern Africa?
Okay. Well, I am I am of I'm Ngoni, right? My dad's from the Ngoni tribe, that was currently situated in southern Malawi. Well, that's where from my grandfather's from out there. But I feel like I'm pretty much from all of Southern Africa because like I was born in Botswana, straight up. I'm straight up a Gabs boy. And then
Mm,
I I moved. I've moved around all around Botswana. I've also lived in Zambia for a little bit. I am a Zambian. My mom's from Zambia, and she's Tumbuka on her side. So uh, and you, as you know, the history from basically what Ngoni people are. Ngoni people, we came all the way. We went from Cameroon, came down to SA, went from SA, went back up because Shaka was real. So
Mm-hmm.
and then yeah, so basically I feel like I'm from all different parts of Southern Africa personally, because like I mean my heritage comes from many different aspects and many different tribes, and I kind of love Southern Africa. I've lived there most of my life. And yeah, so that's basically who I am, and how I'm connected to Southern Africa. Lynn, how about yourself? Talk to us about your Southern African connection, as well as you mentioned that you had just moved out recently. So what exactly is that all about as well?
Okay, so I'm Kalanga.
Uh-huh.
I'm a Kalanga Botswana. Home for me is Botswana. The Kalanga tribes kind of migrated sort of from Zimbabwe,
Mm-hmm.
and I know I have bits of Zambia on my mom's side of the family, but both sides of my family live in um Kalanga land in Botswana, you
Okay.
know. So for me, I am full on 100% like Kalanga. That is my culture, that is my heritage, that is what I live and breathe. Um, and right now, I'm living in South Africa. I'm living in Cape Town. I'm away for school. And obviously, like I said, moving away from home and kind of learning how to fit in society and realizing that you're so influenced by where you come from. It's the little things, the food, it's the way you talk, it's your humor, the way you relate to people. Everything is kind of linked back to how you were raised. And I find that so, so very interesting. And like also for the people that don't know, me and Masuzio, we're out here representing Zambia, and I'm representing Botswana, he's representing Zambia. But for the people that don't know, Southern Africa is basically made up of the states of Angola, Zambia, like we said, Malawi, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Botswana, South Africa, Swaziland, Lesotho. And obviously, there's a few of these countries that's kind of like a debate thing, but it also depends on like geopolitical zones and what version of the map you're looking at,
Yeah.
whether it's like a UN based map or, you know, different approaches to it. But yeah, that is basically the outline of Southern Africa. And there's a whole lot of rich culture, there's a whole lot of stories, there's a whole lot of there's just so much that hasn't been brought to light. And even myself growing up as a kid, I didn't have access to this content, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think podcasts like this are so, so integral.
Okay. Then
So,
I just love like your basic description of basically what we're talking about here. Um, what I would really like to ask you is, like, as a recent expatriate, like someone who just recently is now like traveling across the different regions within Southern Africa and things like that.
uh
Um,
huh.
what about like Southern Africa do you feel like somewhat connects all of us, or like that you have seen from your experiences with Southern Africans, and what do you feel like is like the thing that you kind of like most appreciate about Southern Africa?
I think it's a strange thing because, like I say, I'm Kalanga, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the one thing that I've seen that kind of connects Southern Africa for me is the languages that we speak. So also part of the reason why this podcast is called Bantu Born is because the language that I speak is Bantu based. So there's all these languages in Southern Africa are kind of linked. So being in South Africa and being able to communicate with people and hearing the languages, like I hear Venda or I hear Xhosa, I hear Zulu, and here and there I pick up bits and pieces of words, and it doesn't need to be explained because it's just the clicks and the
Yeah.
sounds and how it all merges, and it sounds so familiar because it's so similar to the language I was raised on. Because at home we speak Kalanga, and then my second language is English, and then I had to learn Setswana because Setswana is one of the official languages in Botswana. So it's just been really interesting. The one thing that does connect Southern Africa for me definitely is the languages.
Yeah.
And like that's because of, and like if we look back, because we did our research for this podcast and we're trying to figure out exactly what the origins of Southern Africa are. and the more we delved into it, the more we realized that actually Southern Africans are origins are based on the San people and the people like the Bantu people.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just really interesting how, yes, we all know that the San people were the first and no first inhabitants of Southern Africa, and the Bantu expansion, like all the way from Nigeria, I think it was Cameroon, yeah,
Yeah.
from that border between, yeah, all the way from there, and they traveled all this way, and along the way they're conquering kingdoms, they're building things up, they're learning, and it's the coolest thing when you do the research. But Masuzio, like I'm curious, like I've always been curious about you also because personally
Okay.
for me, I just shifted within Southern Africa, but
Yeah.
you moved the whole continent over, skipped over oceans. Like I'm trying to figure out like how's that been?
Okay. Okay. Well. Okay. Yeah. So for everyone out there, basically, I moved from Southern Africa. I mean, that was about 2 to 3 years ago now. I mean, yeah, 3 to 4 years ago, I traveled to the United States to go to pursue schooling, and I I've traveled all the way here, and something actually kind of related to what happened with you is that um the one thing I really appreciated, especially about Southern Africa, is that when I actually got here, I actually I was like the only person who was straight up from Zambia that I'd met in my school. Yeah, there had been some people in the past, but I'd never really met anyone from Zambia myself personally. So what ended up happening was I kind of gravitated towards like the Southern African community, and I had met a South African. I met a. I can't believe I'm gonna butcher this right now. I met a Xhosa woman, and I also
You
met.
didn't butcher it. You didn't butcher it. That was good.
I also met a guy from Lesotho, and something really cool about it was that, like, when we were having conversations, right? I mean, like, if we wanted to like have a conversation, and we could like I could pick up, I could like me with my broken Setswana, it's my terrible broken Setswana. We could have a somewhat of a conversation, just because we kind of had languages are kind of mutually intelligible to a certain extent, because like of course, like, as South Africans have these like 11 languages, and they have to learn a lot of different languages. But for me and the guy from Lesotho, we knew like this baseline language, and then but even despite that, we could have some kind of a conversation that was within just amongst ourselves, because like, okay, fine, using English is fun sometimes, but you'd also want to be able to have like a conversation just in your native tongue, and like the ability for me to have a conversation with someone like that, even despite the fact that we came from completely different parts of Southern Africa, it was still kind of a very cool thing. And I do appreciate the point that Southern African languages have this thing whereby you can the idea of this being somewhat mutually intelligible, even though everything is not the same. uh you can still find your way in between and learn. You can easily pick up what's going on. It's kind of a brilliant and lovely, an amazing thing that we can each have conversations and have this thing that's unique to all of us, and unique to that's something that we can all talk about and be together about. So this is amazing, and it's actually kind of amazing. As soon as you mentioned that, I was like, oh yeah, I remember like the fact that I could do that, and that was actually kind of amazing to be able to like talk to someone who I've never actually been to the country. I've never actually been within Lesotho, but to a certain extent, we could still have a conversation that was somewhat mutually intelligible, and it was kind of amazing, of course.
Yeah. It's really
And
interesting
yeah,
because it feels like people kind of look at Africa as this one big continent. Like if you live in Kenya, then you must know somebody in Egypt. Like it's
true, true.
and I think that is the thing. Like we are kind of connected in that solidarity of being African, and we're very proud of that. Or at least we're getting proud of it now because we
Mhm.
have access to things like social media, and we're understanding more and more what it means to kind of hold on to who and what you are. But anyway, let me ask you a question, Masuzio. What's the one thing that you actually miss about being home and being in like Africa and
Oh, you're gonna put me on the spot now,
Oh
huh?
yes, I am. Now you know this, cause
uh-huh.
yeah, you did mention that you've been living in America. So what are the things that you know?
That I miss most of all.
Yeah,
Frankly, I could say I miss you, Lynn. Yeah.
of course. I mean, that's
um
pretty obvious.
yeah. Genuinely, I feel like a lot of things that I miss about Southern Africa are like uh it's respect to the it's respect to stuff like the culture and things like the food and the food and the people, like the atmosphere itself, like
Mm-hmm.
when you're here, I mean, when you're surrounded by people, your people, and you have that attachment to them, it's kind of it's so different. You feel like you're in place when you're in your own society, because when by you look to your left and you look to your right, and you feel like, oh yes, I know these people, and I know what they where they come from. Of course, you know, it's in an everyday society. You don't actually know the people on the street, but when you look next to you and you kind of see that familiarity, and you can kind of see yourself in those people, and you're like, oh yes, you kind of miss that to a certain extent, and it's kind of nice just being around your own people sometimes. Um,
Yeah.
the lovely thing about Southern Africa is we just also just have to have you just tend to have this warm and welcoming atmosphere around you all the time, because like people are more willing to like take their time to be to be friendly and talk to you, and like uh it's easier for you to have conversations with people even on the street, to just like talk to people and just be like, oh yes, just
Yeah.
have a baseline conversation with someone that you just meet in a combi, or you meet and you meet when you're getting fresh chips or something like that. It's so much. Oh yeah, and I do miss the fresh chips, by the way. I which is a really weird
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
Really
And
weird
also,
thing.
like,
Yeah.
please understand, we're not talking about like any chips. He's talking about, the ones on the corner street,
Exactly
the
those
ones
ones.
that the dirty ones. We call them the dirty ones because they hit the spot. Okay, you know what we're talking about.
Yeah. Um.
But that's like one thing. I agree with you. The
Yes.
food. Oh
Yes.
my goodness. The food is what I miss most about home. Like I said, I just shifted over, but woo, I miss mom's cooking. And also I feel like Kalanga people just put nuts in everything.
Uh huh.
So I
No,
miss that.
I feel like yeah, you've been dissing in the South African spot for a while.
You know what the thing is?
Mm-hmm.
You know what? And also, you mentioned something really interesting. You said like even like getting a combi ride, like
Yeah.
the conversations you hear on a combi are not conversations you can hear in an Uber.
Yeah, that's true.
Like that's just I don't know what it is, but personally, like in my village back home, I used to get all the gossip like on the combi. I was on it, but yeah, I don't know. Like it is the food. Like for us, things like mopane worms. We talked about this at length and how they're getting how their populations are now dwindling, and I'm just so depressed about it. But it's fine. It's okay.
Mm.
I'm gonna take a breath.
So then,
Okay. Mhm.
uh, so so what exactly about the Mopani ones were you saying? Because like what about what why exactly do you bring those up in particular? Because
Because first of all, I'm not getting them here.
okay.
Like I know there's probably like stores here, but Cape Town is really big and it's really scary, and I'm too much of a scaredy cat to go out and find them myself. But honestly speaking, I wouldn't know where to get them except they order them already made,
Mm-hmm.
on Uber Eats or something like that. But there's just something about home cooking, man. It just hits the spot. It's the memories you grew up with. That's what you grew up eating. Like I know people really get shocked because moving to Cape Town, people are still shocked that I still cook the same way that I cooked at home. I'm like, what? They're like, oh, you're closer to the ocean now. You should be eating fish. I'm like, nah. Botswana's a beef country. Okay, we grew up on beef. I like my suswa. I like my tribe. Mix it all up. Like that's what I grew up on. And people have this expectation of you moving away from home and having to be a certain way, act a certain way, talk a certain way. Because I can't deny the fact that I'm westernized. We were talking about this the other day, how we're being out here, the only thing you have is fast food and everything is processed and everything is fatty and it's just not home because at home we eat greens. Like we
Mm.
eat what the earth provides. It's from literally from the farm, literally to your table and onto your plate. That's how we live at home. So it's just kind of strange and it's adjusting and it's learning and it's just kind of learning to go with the flow. But at the end of the day, isn't that what being progressive is, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, as a whole, like, it's always you always find yourself in a what you call what I call like a catch-22 because like, um, you kind of find yourself in a situation whereby, uh, you miss the nice things about home in terms of like being able to grow your own food, being able to like self sustaining and uh being be, being self sustaining. Like back in the day, people had this huge dependency on being able to like make sure that you grow your own food, you make sure that you have things that are always available to you, and you can always make a good uh you can always make you can always make a good meal from home, and you could always like you plant things like butternuts, you plant things like morojo and all those things. But when you like move to the city, right, you kind of get divorced
Mm.
away from such things. Like
Yeah,
you're no longer part of like the growth chain and the value chain and things like that. And it's so much different. Like this is just the basic idea of like, well, immunization. And what happens is like, because as much of our culture was based around your traditional foods and how exactly, and the time periods and the harvest, and going to things like the harvest festival after the rains, and all these other different aspects, because like
yeah,
traditional African life is like a lot based around all the times of the seasons and everything like that, and how you grow things.
exactly.
And when you then transition on to a specific point whereby you're talking about when you're talking about people moving to a more urban and more structured society, more westernized society, you kind of
Yeah,
miss a lot of those little aspects of it, because like, as we say, like culture is not exactly about um culture is in everything that you do. It's like in those very little small things that you do. You may not consider them culture, but it's super weird that we don't actually take time to
yeah,
appreciate like things like, oh no, that food that I eat, making sure that making sure that you go to the komurake every weekend and things like that. Those small
yeah,
little aspects of culture that you kind of get laid by the wayside when you kind of go into this full on dependency of being in a westernized society. It's those little aspects that I feel like a lot of people are missing out, especially when you move out of, or move away from home, and then you're so separated. Because like, I feel like I was raised more in the city, and
yeah,
I didn't have that same kind of opportunity to like, oh no, I'm going to the farm every Wednesday. But when I'm assuming you grew up in somewhat of a more of a village setting where you have people come in. Of course, you lived near F Town, but Francistown, but you still had that village aspect
yeah.
to your upbringing, right?
Yeah, because that's the thing. I had a bit of both. And I think
Uh-huh.
it was really important to my parents that I get a taste of both. I think they wanted me to assimilate into society and be able to build a life for myself within society. They wanted me to be able to sustain myself. And I think they did a great job in that regard. And also they had a great balance of kind of us going back to the village, school holidays, spending time with our grandmothers, learning how to pound maize,
Mm-hmm.
learning how to sift through like that stuff. Like I used to watch my grandmothers do that stuff,
Mm.
so it's ingrained in me. And definitely there's definitely a way that I act when I'm at home in the village as opposed to when I'm in the city or something like that. And the thing is, our parents also grew up in these villages, and eventually they were moving and they were migrating, and that's basically isn't that the basic essence of who we are? Because like we said, like you were talking about agriculture and going komoraking and all of that stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
if you look through history, you see that agriculture is such an integral thing to why people were migrating and so forth and so on. I mean, like I said, the Bantu people moved all the way from Nigeria and they landed all the way down here in Southern Africa. That's amazing. And all along the way, they were like I said, they were building kingdoms and they were being exposed to different things. And in some ways, they were kind of being um, they were evolving, and the culture was changing, and the language was changing, and they were fighting wars, and they were interacting with so many different people along the way. And isn't that exactly what is happening? The only difference is now we call it westernization.
True.
And it is what it
True.
is.
Yeah.
Like the more you get westernized, the more you are in the cities, the more you're realizing that the world is actually more of a global village than
Yeah.
anything else. The more you realize you need to assimilate, you need to learn, you need to find your place in society. And at the end of the day, like as sad as it is, you kind of want to make money and just sustain yourself. That's what it's about.
I I mean, granted, 100%. Like no one can deny the fact that everyone is trying to make sure that they, I mean, you have to try and provide for yourself and your kin so that at least you have something for the future, right? That's
Yeah.
100% true. I mean,
Yeah.
I love the way you put it in the sense that as Bantu people we are immigrate. I mean, we immigrate. We change. We adapt. What people who what people who are not who don't sit still. We tend to have. We tend to move around, and um, we tend to assimilate into whatever new thing that we find, and new place that we find ourselves at, right? um
Yeah.
so I mean
And that's the thing. That's
uh-huh.
the thing. That's the thing also. Like as young Africans, we tend to feel like we're betraying ourselves.
Yeah.
We're betraying our cultures. We're betraying the way we're raised, the more we change and the more we were westernized, we feel like that's a betrayal.
Mm.
And somewhere in there has to be a little slack, because isn't that the essence of society? Isn't that the reason why there's an even greater need to try and preserve our cultures, try and put it out there? Because a long time ago, um, when Africa was in that colonization era, people were trying to come over here and cover up just how great we were.
Mm.
They didn't want us to know that Africa had all of this potential. They treated us like we were those dark continent, people. And now the more we have access to things like social media, we're kind of changing the narrative through social media. We're changing the narrative through art. We're changing the narratives through so many different kinds of platforms. And that's really, really important. Like the other day, remember how we were talking about how um simple things like official languages,
Yeah.
and how, for example, South Africa has like the bulk of their languages, the ethnic languages are official. Whether it's Sotho, Xhosa, whatever, it's considered official. Countries like Botswana, where you have the general population is called Botswana. So Setswana and English are the official languages, and then we have all these other sub ethnic groups, but their languages are not official.
Mm.
So you get issues like tribal, like we don't necessarily get racism in Africa. We get tribalism over here a lot. And Okay, I don't think I said that right. Look, racism exists. But tribalism is also like a huge, huge thing,
Yeah.
and it's just also stems down to what, like, who colonized the different nations, and it's really interesting. Remember when I told you, like, coming from Botswana and traveling to Namibia that one time, just after crossing the border, the entire landscape changes in regards to things like architecture, the language that's
Mm-hmm.
spoken. It's really, really interesting. And then when you move into Windhoek, you can see it in the architecture. You can see that German, that Dutch influence. You can see it. Whereas, remember, I was telling you, like, in regards to colonization in Botswana,
Yeah.
even though Botswana was a protectorate and everything, but we were under the British. And I was telling you how, for me, colonization is, it's a thing that happened, but I don't have the evidence of it, because the version of Botswana now is the version that I've seen, grown up with, was born into. This is my reality. So when I crossed the border into Namibia, it was so strange. I didn't understand why the buildings were different. I didn't get it until you actually go to, like, the museums, and they tell you about the culture and the slavery and the Dutch and this happened and that and that and that. And then you start to realize, oh damn, they're our neighbors, but they have a whole chapter of history over here that I'm not even akin to. And that's also the important thing about this podcast, is that i it's basically going to be me putting my ignorance out on a stage, and also trying to educate myself, because it's quite embarrassing, the lack of knowledge that I have about Southern Africa. And it's I think this podcast has challenged me, and it's kind of embarrassed me and exposed me, and it's really, really great, but it's also kind of uncomfortable, because I don't want to be learning about my home from other people. That just
Yeah.
doesn't sit right with me. Yeah.
I mean,
So
um, I think it doesn't sit right with anyone, honestly. Um, the idea that our history is something that has been that is told to us rather than told by
yeah.
us is
Mhm.
a problem that we feel. I mean, any person within Southern Africa would feel is s- completely and should be something that should be corrected.
Yeah.
Because whenever you look at history and you look at the history books, you find that a lot of it. I'm not saying that they have not been authors that have talked about it from from the aspect of a Southern African, and Southern Africans have not written about these things. What I'm saying is, they most of the authors that we get, most of the books that you receive, the most of the people who are um, most of the people who are at the forefront of recording our history, maybe a
Mhm.
lot, especially a lot back in the day, was uh, were people from the colonial area. And as much as those people may have, some of them may have tried to be accurate and uh, portray the truth as it was. Um, Whenever your story is being told by someone else, you don't have
Yeah.
control of your story, and the story is
Exactly.
not exactly as you would like it to be told. So I
Exactly.
feel like as much as we have a proud history of being a people who come and immigrate and assimilate, we have to be people who also uh, are proud of our culture and show our culture out there, because we also have to be a people who try and display our culture out there, who have to be the ones to tell people about our culture and be the first people to display it on uh, display it live for other people to see and understand. um, so especially in the fact that,
Exactly.
even through the whole idea of colonialism and all that, I feel like at this point we have taken a back seat and been like, okay, fine, this is we took a back seat to our own culture and took a back seat to our own world, and just allowed people to give us give us the next big deal, instead of being the ones at the forefront and saying, okay, fine, I want to change this thing. I respect a lot. I respect a lot out of the generation where a lot of the generation that of people who are very instrumental in the whole independence movement of our societies, like guys like Kenneth
Yeah.
Kaunda, guys like Nelson Mandela, guys like guys like Sister Kama, guys like why am I blanking on this man's name?
Well,
All
at least
all
you
these
know some. I'm sitting here like, okay.
uh
I don't like that's the thing. I think also the problem with me personally is that politics, oof, oof, politics. I'm just gonna stop right there. But yeah,
but
sorry, go on, you were saying.
no, but the thing is, the problem is that, I mean, I know people have a tendency of not being wanting to talk about politics and be like, oh, politics is such a huge thing, but people have to understand politics is everywhere, and it's an aspect of life that we all have to deal with. And being active and being purposeful in choosing to take part in your own society, that's what politics is. Like being purposeful and saying, okay, fine, I want a society for my children, which whereby whereby my children don't have to pay for education, or where my children have access to healthcare, where my children are able to set their minds to any possible idea and be able to achieve it. I mean, we're just looking for a situation whereby we can have the right to self-determination. You know what I mean? Back in the day, if you look at it, like the aspect of the people's ability to choose what happens to their own country and what happens within their own country was something people fought over and died over. And for us to be here and not take that mantle up and not talk about it is also another aspect of like, okay, fine, we are not really appreciative of what those people did. And I mean, 100%, I believe that these people did an amazing. They tried their best, and I mean, they may not have been perfect people, but they saw an ideal that they wanted for their future, and then they tried to pursue that. And I feel like people need to make sure that they see ideals for their future and see what they want for their future and see what they want for their children or the people that come after them. Right?
Yeah.
You may not always be the same person who you're fighting, whose children you're fighting for, but you have an ideal, a vision of your society, and we need to be an active participant in making sure that happens. Right?
Yeah. Because the one thing, like you're talking about independence and all that,
Yes.
um, the one thing that I have learned, like moving to South Africa, is that we might all be Southern African, we might be African or whatnot, but each nation has endured its own traumas, it has its own
True.
stories, and we tend to think that we're all in this together. One
Yes.
thing living in South Africa has taught me is that you can be part of the conversation, you can be empathetic, you can be sympathetic, but only to an extent. There comes a point in the conversation, especially here in South Africa, because apartheid was was the that's the base, that's a lot of their history, that's what it's based on.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be very sensitive. You didn't endure it, you didn't go through it, so you can't possibly, there's no infinite universe where you could possibly understand what it was like.
Yes.
There's no way you could possibly put yourself in their shoes to the point where you could actually be on the same level of their pain, their understanding of the situation, the justification of the situation. There's no way. And that's the one thing that being in South Africa has taught me. And also, like, you look back through history, and I was telling you, like, sometimes it does feel like they were trying to wipe us out. But because also we have the people that colonized us, and then you have the missionaries that came in with the good word, and you have us claiming our independence and stuff like that. And I was telling you, Masujo, because we're born frees, like we were born into a land of independence and
Yeah.
goodness, and life is pretty good and easy for us at this point. So just doing research for this podcast and realizing the stuff that I didn't know about Southern Africa. For example, like I told you, I'm officially like the biggest, hugest fan of Zimbabwe right now. Just
Mm.
doing the research and seeing how that Bantu expansion kind of led to the formation of Great Zimbabwe. And you hear about the wars that they went through, you hear about their architecture, you hear about, you know, how they were just a force to be reckoned with. And I didn't know this. I didn't know this. And how, remember when the Europeans came over, they tried to disguise the fact that it was actually Zimbabweans who were building the structures. They
Yeah.
didn't want people to know that we had these skills, that we were capable. So sometimes I think you get to a point where you do want to kind of take control of your own narrative, because if you don't, they will paint you out to be either the like just the worst kind of thing to walk on earth. And it's just so interesting, the little that I know about Southern Africa, and also the arrogance of thinking I know everything, like the arrogance of thinking that the confidence and the pride and thinking that I do know everything, and only realizing that I don't know anything. Like,
I,
so yeah.
I think 100%. It's a thing that happens, especially when you are, especially when you travel outside, uh, when you travel outside or travel outside your home or travel outside away from where what you're used to. Um, like as soon as I came here, I kind of got involved in like the African student community here, and it was a thing whereby I once I got involved in that, I then started doing a lot of research into like um as into like seven great things about Africa, and you kind of learn about things like, oh, the first churches were built in Africa, in Ethiopia. You learn about things like um uh uh, sorry, things like things like the buildings of Great Zimbabwe, and how they were prosecuted afterwards, and you learn about all these different amazing things about the place where you're from, especially when you're away from it. That kind of enlightens you to what you're really looking out on. Because like when you're at home, uh, when you look around and you see the same things every day, and you're like, oh, this is home, I know everything about it, because you feel very comfortable in that space. But when you actually
Yeah.
try and put some effort into finding out about where you are and what you're doing, especially when you move out, and because it's something that you get pulled on, you get dragged into, because like most of the time, oh yeah, I'm representing this place, and you want to represent it well, and then you start looking into it, and you're like, oh yes, all these different things, they end up happening there. And um I think it's an experience that I feel like a lot of people should always try and go for. Like, if you always have, if you ever have the opportunity to leave Southern Africa to come out and just see the rest of the world, I mean, I would 100% encourage you to do it, because what the experiences that you get from not being where you are, try it really really inform you on the place where you actually are, because like it's just the same aspect of what people always say, like people always say that you 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 what's this you never, if you love it, you have to let it go, right? So like that distance
Hmm.
away from that distance away from home kind of makes you fall in love with it even more, right?
True.
And when you when you're so far away from home, you fall in love with it, and then when you go back, you have a greater appreciation of what you have where you are. And so
True.
that's a thing that really gets to me, and especially now that I've been here and out here for so long, I'm like, I appreciate our culture, and I appreciate the way people talk. I appreciate the way Africans interact with each other, because now that I have experienced how other people do it, I'm like, I long more for what I didn't know. And it's an amazing thing to kind of realize how much of your culture you really appreciate and how much of it you really do love, because when you're not there, it's all of a sudden now missing, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I really appreciate this. And I give it up to everyone who can still see that from where they are. But for me, it took me coming outside and not being there to actually really be like, oh, this is a really great and amazing place that I'm from, and I really want to like expose that and tell people about that now.
Yeah, that's me also. Like there's this feeling also, like people assumed that when I moved home that I would start to act a certain way and I would start to do certain things. And people are so
Mm-hmm.
surprised when I still, like, I'm still me. You know, people are so surprised and they feel like, oh, that makes you basic. Oh, you're not progressive enough. Oh, you're not, you know. So I don't know. I think also being at the age that we are, being 25, 26, trying to figure life out, and like these are the formative years. We're leaving the formative years. Like
Yeah.
we've formed our habits at this point, you know,
Yes.
and I think culture and learning and unlearning is a great thing, because as much as we do want to hold on to our culture, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's kind of comes across as oppressive, you know, in regards to culture. Because I'm not even gonna lie to you. So there was a point in time when I was younger, when I thought I had everything figured out again. Obviously, I did not. But I was kind of trying to rebel
Yeah.
against my cultures and my traditions. And, you know, I was like, oh, that's not progressive. And I'm going to do what I see on TV. And I'm going to dress the way I see on TV. And I'm going to eat the way I see on TV. And, you know, there was a lot of that kind of pushing away from my culture. And also, it also does depend on what you expose yourself to, the people you spend time with, the things you watch on TV, the
Mm,
music you listen to.
that's true.
You know, I think that the way that I talk is because of the stuff that I watch on TV and the music that I listen to. I love hip hop and I love American hip hop. So that's where a lot of the way I speak comes from. And now the older that I'm getting, I'm exposing myself to so many different things, spirituality and religion, and you know, just it's a cultural masala exchange mix happening in there. And the thing is, you have to learn to kind of forgive yourself and let it go and go through the processes. And if it needs to be a change, if you need to transition, if you need to be a little bit more open-minded, you need to allow that to happen. You need to let go of that guilt of, I'm betraying self, I'm betraying the way I was raised, I'm betraying, you know, all of that. And like I said, this podcast is a way to bridge between that whole
Yeah.
tradition thing, that westernization, that expectation of society, also the expectation that you have of self.
Yeah.
This is what that podcast is for,
And
essentially.
100% all this will be covered. Unfortunately, I think we're just about out of time. But one last
Yeah,
thing, let me just ask you, Lynn. So when you moved out,
oh
I
gosh.
don't think I've ever asked you this. So did they ever give you that warning, like, oh, don't get involved in drugs or things like that, such and such? Did you get that from your
Of
parents?
course. Well, I got this the conversation that I got from my mom
Uh-huh.
when I left Botswana, when I left the country.
Mm.
I have this habit of making friends with boys,
Oh,
as
okay.
is the case
As
with, you
evidence.
know, as evidenced by this podcast. When I left home, I actually hadn't realized that my mom had picked it up.
Oh,
But when I
okay.
left home, she told me, she was like, "You need to stop making friends with boys." And I looked at her like, I was like, "Mom, you know, no, I don't like, they're my friends. They're like, they're friends." And she's like, "I know, but you need to stop making friends with boys." And I don't think I
Uh,
understood what she meant when I was leaving. But the older that I'm getting, and I've only been here for like a year and a half, but I kind of understand what she's saying. I get it
okay.
now. Yeah. What about you, Masuzi? What do they tell you? Stranger danger?
Uh, That mean okay. What is like they really didn't want me to get involved with drugs apparently.
Oh,
Only
so
if they
they're,
knew, right?
yeah,
FYI, mom,
exactly.
nothing happened.
Well,
Yes.
mom.
So yes. Yeah, so that was that major talking to me today about like yeah, mainly my dad's always been that person who is like he's like, okay, fine, man, just stay focused, work on your work, get things done. Everything has its time. You'll have time to be like to be chilled and like have fun on another time. But yeah, my dad's always been that person who's just like, yeah, man, just focus and keep on doing what you're doing. Yeah, so like I was really excited when I was leaving because I got a chance to like go and see another place, and my parents, I think they were proud of me. uh
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, my mom's always been there, graduation ceremonies and all that, so I kind of like that. So yeah, just an aspect that, okay, fine, their son's going out there to get a final doctorate. I think that's what they really liked about the whole idea anyway. Because yeah, I think technically I'll be the first in my family to get one. But
Ooh.
so
Yeah.
yeah, that
I
was
didn't know that.
yeah, well, my no my dad's like they've got bachelors and all that. That's not that's unusual. That's not unusual, but for my personally, I'll be the person to actually go all the way, first person to go all the way if I do finish anyway. But either way, guys, I'll just
Yeah,
thank you.
like like for you, personally for me, my parents are just glad to have me out of the house. Okay, they have 5 kids. They are happy. But before before we shut this down, um I just wanted to say, like, this podcast, like, we're definitely gonna be throwing spotlights on different aspects of Africa. So that
Mhm.
Southern Africa was throwing different spotlights on different countries, cultures, events, like the cultural like events and current events and stuff that's going on. And learn by told you Masuja, there's 5 things that we usually look out for in order to kind of classify and characterize a culture essentially. And that's the first thing is heroes and icons. The second is culture.
Mm.
The third would be science and technology. The fourth would be art and architecture. And the fifth and last one would be military. So definitely through this podcast, I want to be throwing spotlights on those different things within Southern Africa. And we definitely want to have people on on the podcast. We definitely want to have people with different backgrounds and different stories and want to learn about people's cultures, want to have conversations about so many different topics that affect each that affect also even us at where we are in life, and we want to learn from people and we want to exchange ideas and we want to break the mold and have a good laugh and be controversial, shake things up a bit. So yeah,
Yeah,
I'm definitely looking forward to this podcast.
yeah, I am too, and I'm looking forward to what we have planned. So everyone should stay tuned because I'm pretty sure you're going to be uh, you're going to see a lot more of us two in this two podcasts, and we also have plans for different guests to come through. But
Yeah.
otherwise, everyone stay safe out there. Hope everyone's doing well, and otherwise, like, subscribe, shit like that.
Did you just whisper something to me through the did you just
No, no, then continue.
All right, guys. I guess this is us signing off. It's been
Yes.
Bantu born, Western raised with Lynn and Masuzio,
Like and
repping
subscribe.
Southern Africa. You know what it is. Like, subscribe, follow us on social media. We are gonna be in your face. Okay, don't
All
play
right.
with us. All right, so this is the sign off. Thank you so much for listening. Keep supporting. You know what it is. Bantu born, Western raised.